Good morning. Hope you are well. I'm well myself. Quite well, actually. So today we're going to talk about the only thing, one of the three things that I know how to do confidently and that I can speak confidently to in my life and in my career. That is how to write a best-selling nonfiction book that makes you rich and famous. Let's dive right into it because today we don't have any time to waste. Okay, so how to write a best-selling book that makes you, how to write a best-selling nonfiction book that makes you rich and famous. Well, first of all, claim to fame here. This is me, rich 20-something. This book was was released in 2017. This book hit multiple bestseller lists. This sold tens of thousands of copies, which is a lot for a book. And it was definitely a certifiable cultural phenomenon. When it hit, it made me, it elevated me in the marketplace. It is a claim to fame that lots of people still know me for, even to this day, when I will now be 38 soon, and people still see me as a 20-something. So the branding of a book is very powerful. It can set you up for a long time. Let's talk about exactly what I mean. So first of all, I said bestseller, not best written. There's a big difference. Where's my freaking coffee? Now, you should understand that I am a writer's snob. I am a writer's writer, and I appreciate well-written books. So, if, for instance, I bring a book out like, here's a Hemingway book, For Whom the Bell Tolls. Now, admittedly, I'm on my Hemingway journey this year, so I haven't read this book yet, but I have other books on my shelf that I have read that are some of the best written books of all time, of modern history, some of the best written books that evoke emotion and feelings and create epiphanies. And a bestseller can do that, but a bestseller doesn't mean best written. To write the best book that you can possibly write, first of all, there's no time limit on how long it will take you, and there's no rule that you have to follow in order to write the best written book that you can write. And for some people, their best written book becomes one of the best written books in humanity. It's like I have Les Miserables over there, or if you want to go children's style, I have some Harry Potter over here. And many people could argue those are some of the best written books of all time because of the way they make people feel, or maybe just the imagery and the words and the world that's created in those books. George R.R. Martin, Game of Thrones. Those can be considered some of the best written books of all time. Now, some of those books that are the best written didn't immediately or ever become bestsellers. The ones that I named mostly were bestsellers, but many of the best written books of all time are not bestsellers. Why? Because a bestseller has nothing to do with the quality of the writing. It has to do with the engineering of the product. A best-selling book has certain elements of it that give it the ability to reach as many people as possible, and it's not just or even only the writing. So, a best-selling book, there's two ways a book can be a bestseller. It can be a subjective bestseller or an algorithmic bestseller. Now, I'm making these terms up, but they fit pretty well within what happens in the industry. On your subjective bestseller list, you have the top one would be New York Times list. For a while, there was also Wall Street Journal and USA Today. I think Wall Street Journal discontinued their list recently. USA Today discontinued it and brought it back. New York Times is still one of the lists that they have for authors that they rank authors on. But you have to understand this is a subjective bestseller list. So this is essentially an editor's pick. They don't call it editor's pick. They don't call it, they don't call it. It's like the J.D. Power and Associates Award for cars. You ever see those on American commercial TV where they're like, J.D. Power and Associates ranks the Buick, whatever, the #1 car of the season. And it's like, that's a pay-for-play award. That's an editor's choice award where a small group of people are picking whatever they think is the best based on people who are paying them, people who are influencing them, or their own personal subjective criteria. And I know this personally too because I used to work at a newspaper, and we would make these bestseller lists or these best attorneys of LA lists, best restaurants, and many of these lists were just payola, which means you pay to get a spot on this list, or you pay to be in the top 3, because people knew that buying into these lists also created more sales for them. It was just a marketing tool, right? So people would pay to be on these lists, and we would accommodate them because newspapers are dying. And they've been doing it for a long time. I would say to a certain extent, movies and music are also editors and choice and payola, pay to play, in many different ways. So those are subjective bestsellers. And with a subjective bestseller, you don't have as much control over that because you have to get someone else to approve you, to like you, and to want to support you. But oftentimes you can buy your way onto those lists through various means. This video is not going to be about that, but I just want to let you know that a lot of bestsellers, including New York Times bestsellers, buy their way onto the list through various means of purchasing bulk orders and massaging the system to make editors feel like their book is more important than it is. And when I say editors, I mean editors of the New York Times or Wall Street Journal, wherever they're doing their reports. And so this is a way of buying that list, but also it's subjective because the editors themselves are making the choice. Now, when I say algorithmic bestseller, I mean more like Amazon. And Amazon is interesting because Amazon has all these different bestseller categories, and then they rank the books that are doing the best in those categories by sales volume, honestly. It's mostly just sales volume. It's not popularity. It's not what the editors think. It's mostly just a ranking system based on sales. Now, here's why this is interesting. There was a 2022 antitrust case between the US government and Penguin Random House because Penguin Random House, which is one of the big 5 publishers, was trying to buy one of the other big 5 publishers, which is Simon & Schuster, basically their biggest competitor. The United States blocked the merger of these 2 companies because they thought it would be too big of an advantage, too big of a competitive advantage. But in the discovery process of this case, which I've read hundreds of pages, 700 or 800 pages of a 1,000-word court case. It's a big book. It's called The Trial. In that big court case, you can see all the things that the publishers are doing to try to bolster sales. And what they've self-reported is that they actually care more about Amazon rankings and Amazon bestseller rankings than they do rankings like New York Times, because New York Times, everyone knows the industry, and rankings like that are all just editor's choice. They don't reflect how well the book is actually selling. They're branding pieces, but they're not related really to sales metrics. Amazon metrics are mostly algorithmic, meaning they're taking into account mostly sales. And because of that, publishers use Amazon rankings to judge the real success of a book and of that author, or of an author they're looking to sign based on past Amazon data. Amazon doesn't lie when it comes to that. So that's another way of becoming a bestseller. It's not just what the editors think, but it's also just how well are you performing in your category. And this means that you don't need to sell 1 million copies or 100,000 copies. You could sell a smaller number of copies, but because of the way that you're positioning yourself and the way that you're labeling yourself within the Amazon system, you can become a bestseller in that category. I mean, this is a good example. Clear, this is one of the books that my company, New Wave Press, has produced. Clear was a bestseller in 3 Amazon categories. I think alcohol addiction, I think healing. So alcohol addiction, healing, and maybe alcohol recovery. I actually really like the fact that it was #1 in healing for about a month, and that is really important because I think that's the core of what the book is about. But the whole point is we didn't need to take on New York Times. Now, funny enough, we actually had a New York Times Square billboard with Clear. And the billboard, this wasn't how we planned it, but the billboard was right next to a giant tequila ad. So it was, quit drinking using neuroscience, here's some tequila. That's just America for you. But that's during the release, we were #1 in 3 categories on Amazon, and we had a Times Square billboard. To me, that's worth a lot more than a subjective ranking of a New York Times piece. Even though it's nice to have that, it doesn't really say anything about the numbers or the popularity of the book from a reader perspective. So just understand what we say when we're saying bestseller. I'm not saying best written, even though Clear is well written. Okay, even though Rich 20-something is well written. I would even say my 3rd book, The True Artifact, which is a book of philosophy, is more well written than those other books right there, and it's not a bestseller. So well, actually, it might have hit bestseller on one Amazon category, but it's not like it's for people who know. If you know, you know. If you're a true artifact reader, you're really an OG. So don't get those two terms mixed up. Bestseller, best written, and just know that your book doesn't need to be the best written in order to sell well in your category. You have to understand how those categories are created. So then there's subjective bestseller and there's algorithmic bestseller. Okay, so those are things to think about. Now, moving on from that, to write a bestseller, you need to have three things. You need to have timing, you need to have positioning, you need to have perspective. So timing is really just about understanding the culture. So when I wrote Rich 20 something, there's a couple things to notice here. One, this is this was published in 2017, and it was written between 2014 and 2016. And so this is the peak of social media culture, especially the peak of Instagram culture. And you can even see that the cover of the book is stylized and formatted in a way where it actually looks like an old app that we used to use on our phone called WordSwag, which is basically just a text-on-picture app that we use to make all these different quotes on IG. And I didn't particularly want the cover to look like that. That is what the publisher thought would do well. It did fine, but it wasn't what I wanted, even to the point where it's like, well, at that time now I'm living in New York. At the time I wasn't living in New York, I was in LA, I was an LA guy. And I'm like, I don't need the Empire State Building on my book. I don't want that. Anyway, the design choices aside, what we got right about that book was the timing of it. It was right in the middle of the social media era. The culture of that moment was very much the optimistic millennial looking for a way out of the 9 to 5, which we were gradually starting to see at that time. The promise was not being fulfilled. The promise of happiness and a feeling of completion and a feeling of excitement for corporate 9 to 5 structured work wasn't there in my generation. We were getting increasingly frustrated, and we were starting to understand that what we'd been told as students all throughout our adolescence was not what's being sold. What's told was not what's being sold. And so that was frustrating us. This book was a part of that frustration, speaking that frustration. Ditch your average job, start an epic business, score the life you want. Again, at New Wave Press, when we publish authors, we give them more say on even what the subtitle is. But actually, it's not a bad one. So we captured the moment. But it wasn't enough to just capture the moment. You also have to have a unique position on that moment. So for me, my position was one of, so some people's position might have been like, the corporate economy sucks, so learn how to rise above your peers and become the boss. Other books or other positions might be, here's how to do drop shipping, or here's how to do e-commerce at that time. Another one might be, here's how to do affiliate sales. Here's how to do, insert the business model. My business model was freelancing. So I took the idea of freelancing as a way of supporting yourself and saying, listen, you have a valuable skill. You need to learn how to use that skill independent of a workplace. Here's how to find customers. Here's how you position yourself. Here's how you sell your services as a one-on-one person. And I took those ideas and I made that my position. Freelancing was always the thing I talked about. I had a course that was very well attended called Freelance Domination. So I kind of owned that space, that area in that era. So that was my positioning. And then within that positioning, I also had a unique perspective. So I don't even know if I have a word for what my perspective is or was around freelancing, but I would say it was direct, it was no nonsense, it was also humorous, and it was grounded. And that might be different than some people who are coming from a more technical perspective, or someone who's coming from a more pedagogical perspective of like, I am the number one teacher, or someone who's coming from a different authority perspective. And so I had a cultural angle, I had a position around what I was teaching, and a perspective on how I showed up teaching it. And I think to have those elements in line, those give you the best opportunity to be picked out by the right person, the right reader for your book. what you'll find is that books do, yes, you can have a mass market book, but books do much better when you imagine writing them for one particular type of person. And I learned this from Seth Godin. Seth Godin, who's one of my favorite thinkers on marketing and business, and really I just think a philosopher, told me one time via email, this is early in my career, this is around 2012 it would have been. I had my first article go viral online, and I emailed him, I said, Seth, this was amazing. How can I engineer another viral article? And he said, don't try to engineer viral articles. Try to write something so honest that someone who reads it can't go to bed without telling at least one more person at night. And that really resonated with me because that's how I tried to write this book. I tried to write this book to a friend. I tried to write this book to someone who was sitting across from me at a bar or a restaurant and I wanted to just help. And this was what I would say to them. And honestly, it worked. I think the voice was what resonated so much. And when you say perspective, you can say, when you say you have a unique perspective, it also means you have a unique voice. I think really what resonated with people most was the voice. And I can even read you just probably the intro or the chapter 1. I'm not going to read you the whole thing, but I just want you to hear kind of the voice. This is the intro. This is a true story too. I can remember very clearly now the precise moment my mind underwent the shift. I was in the back of the kitchen at Longhorn Steakhouse in Atlanta, scooping little clumps of butter into those round plastic containers so that people would have something fatty to slather all over their massive basket of ciabatta bread. Delicious. My manager, Scott, walked up behind me and peered over my shoulder. Do it again. Those balls look like shit. Balls? I asked, looking down at my pants to make sure I wasn't exposed. Those butter balls, re-scoop them. They look like they were scooped on by some kid on the short bus. You're wasting 0.007 micrograms of butter per day with those uneven portions. That's probably costing us $50 per year. Do you want to give me $50? What I wanted to give him was 500 punches right in the face. In reality, though, that type of nitpicking management happened every day. It was nothing special. But that day, something very different happened in my brain. A light went off, or perhaps several lights, and a very strong voice filled my head with a potent question. Why are you wasting your potential at this job that means nothing to you around these people who don't inspire you? And for the first time in my life, I was speechless. I couldn't even answer myself. I knew I had to get out. And from that day forward, I became literally obsessed with figuring out this whole making money thing. I'd forgotten that was the opening to the book. I thought it was something else. It's a very descriptive opening. That's actually a true story too. The only thing that bothers me about that description is that it wasn't ciabatta bread. It's definitely like a honey wheat, and I just felt like ciabatta sounded better to write, but it's not ciabatta. Ciabatta is Italian. Italian would have been like their brand sister, Longhorn, would be Maggiano's, I think. Is Maggiano's by Darden? Maybe it's not. Who's the Italian equivalent? It's not Macaroni Grill. It's not, anyway, it doesn't matter. Yeah, it wasn't ciabatta bread. Other than that, that's a true story. It feels very young to read that, but I'm okay with that. It connected directly to my audience. Obviously, that voice and that perspective resonated with people to make them want to read more of what I had to write, and that book became a cultural phenomenon because of it. So anyway, timing. Like, you want to talk about timing with this book. Right now, I couldn't sell this book to a publisher. Right now, like, I wrote this book. This book was pitched and sold in 2015, at the end of 2015, right at the height of social media culture. Now, not only is social media culture different, and I would be hard pressed to sell the book based on those same credentials, but also the generation has changed. You know, millennials, now I'm 38 this year, you know, so I'm closer to 40. Our perspective of the world isn't Gen Z's perspective of the world. Gen Z, I think, is going to have to find their own way, but because of everything that's happened while they were growing up at that, you know, in the peak of their 20s and still going, they're not nearly as optimistic about their abilities to pull themselves up, and the economy and the world news support that view, depending on how you're looking at it. So I think it would be hard for me to sell this book, again, I don't think a publisher would pick it up in this form, nor would an agent sell it in this form, because they've already kind of sold this dream already. And there's a lot of good stuff in here, but all books are packaging a dream, especially nonfiction books, packaging a dream. Even James Clear's Atomic Habits, which is a fantastic book and was the #1 best-selling nonfiction book across all books for like 10 years, or maybe not up until recently, but like up until maybe 2 or 3 years ago, 10 years. And so that book probably wouldn't even sell as well, because we've already kind of given up the ghost when it comes to habit and performance and productivity. I mean, mostly in part due to Clear's book, but the culture has kind of already consumed that angle, and that time was a while ago, and now it's not that time anymore. It doesn't mean that there can't be other books on building habits, but it has to be from a different angle. Like, even this is another example. One of my friends, John Goodman, wrote a book that's kind of anti-atomic habits, called Unhinged Habits. So it's less about making your life into this video game where you're doing 1% better, but more about working to reorient your life around the things that matter the most to you. And it's just a different perspective. So with the timing, Jonathan has a different position and a different perspective on things. So those factors have to hit in order for you to have a bestseller. The challenge is you won't always know if you have the right timing, the right position, and the right perspective until you've already launched. And it's way easier to look at those things in hindsight. My suggestion for you would be to write more books. Just keep writing, and eventually, if your goal is to hit a nonfiction bestseller, you will find that sweet spot. It will take you probably a few books, and that's okay. It's how it's supposed to be. Okay, timing, positioning, perspective. I would also say dig the well before you need it, and that means with colleagues and with community. So in order for a book to sell as well as it can, people need to know about it and support it from day one, because really, when the book launches, that's actually the beginning of the life of that book. All of the work you put into writing the book, which is probably another video we should make, is just to give it a chance to fly. It's like building an airplane, not knowing if it can fly, but you have to put in as much work as possible just to give it the chance that it won't crash on on takeoff. And one of the best things you can do is to, if you haven't started building up your email list, your SMS or text list, your community early, that's a mistake. And I don't just mean social media, I mean actual community. So for instance, if you join our email list, danieldipiazza.com/subscribe, you're going to get my daily emails about Good Morning, and you're going to get some special stuff as well. I think probably at this time you'll even get a free copy of my book, The True Artifact, if you go to that link. But all that to say, you can't just turn on the marketing engine the week of the launch. It has to be something that you're thinking about well in advance. And I would put it like this. If you're writing a book, it's going to take you about 6 months to a year minimum to write that book. At New Wave, we can do it in 6 months because we have a team helping you work on it. If you're doing it by yourself and you have no support, it's going to take you a year plus to write it minimum. During that year plus, and likely before that, you'll have wanted to start to build your community around things that people are interested in, that you're going to be discussing in the book at a deeper level. I started off doing this because I was blogging, and I was blogging the same thing as I was writing about, and it made sense. Nowadays, I think it makes sense to, yes, build a social component, but also have some sort of either email community, text community, Discord, or some sort of chat circle or school group, some sort of platform that is not connected to the main social channel, so you can have direct attention and direct access to your reader. I still think there's nothing better than email and text, because at the end of the day, you own those assets. I feel okay about things like School and Circle and Discord, but those are also still someone else's platform at the end of the day. If someone opts in to give you their email and you their text message, their SMS, you can always take those things to another platform because you own those assets. With other people's platforms, you run a risk. You always run a risk, but you should be building conversation into your community and creating the interest and the intrigue about what you're writing about before you need to release it. Now, with your colleagues, when I say colleagues, I mean as you're writing and building up your platform of your community, you need to be connecting with other people who are doing similar adjacent work in your space. So in this book, for instance, I have, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 different interviews, not even interviews, like vignettes, people telling their story for about a page, half a page to a page. And these are all friends of mine who are in the industry. And when this book launched, they supported that launch because they were in the book. So they were happier to promote the book because they were in it rather than me just asking for a favor and saying, hey, can you do this for me because you love me? Because they were featured in the book, their name, their website, their information, their story, they're like, oh, we're featured in a major book. Of course, we're going to promote it. So when the book launched, I had an engaged community of people who've been following me for a few years who wanted to help me promote it. I provided a lot of value and they were down with the mission. And I had a group of colleagues who were also in the space with their own audiences who could promote. Those are two massive engines and they worked quite well to shoot it up the lists. So, but you have to dig your well before you need it. You can't just expect this to happen even a month out. It needs to be well orchestrated and well planned. And if the launch of the book is really just day one, you have to be prepared to go for at least a year to 2 years promoting your book in various formats, in various venues, before you say that campaign is complete. If it takes you at least a year to write the book, you better spend the same amount of time or more marketing it. Again, we could go so deep into that, but I just wanted to set your expectations. And even if you hire another marketing company to do this for you, you need to be heavily involved. There's just no way, it's your song and your dance. It's like Michael Jackson could have his whole tour planned out by all of his team, but he still has to show up and do the performance. And so you are still gonna have to show up and do the performance, and you gotta be good, and you gotta be on. That's just book promotion, man. You can't get it all done in a week. It's not gonna be a blitz. You know, you could, some people are Tim Ferrisses and they can do that stuff, but we're taking the stairs over here. The last thing I will say is if and when you launch a book, if you want to be a bestseller, in fact, regardless of whether it does end up becoming a nonfiction bestseller, you want to own as much of the distribution and the information as possible. You know, your customers, your readers are the ones that are engaging with your work. So when we released this book with Penguin, I didn't get any of that customer data, which, you know, sucks because I don't know exactly who read my book. When we released James's book through my publishing company, Clear, we got all that data because since we are the manufacturer, we even get Amazon customer data, which is crazy. And I didn't even know that was a possibility before starting a publishing company. You want to own as much of the data as possible, and you want to own the distribution. So because of the fact that, you know, with New Wave, for instance, and I'm speaking on the other side of the coin now because since I'm a publisher, I know what it takes to accomplish certain things. Like, when this book was published, I had no idea who the buyers were, had no customer data, and I also had no control over how much this cost to produce, how much I was making off of it, or what I could do with the book, essentially. Now that we have our own manufacturing facilities and we actually have a partner who in-house produces everything and distributes everything, not only do we get all customer data, but we also get access to discounts at scale. So when we print books, rather than what Amazon will give, which Amazon will give an author $3 to $5 per book profit, maybe. We're able to give authors anywhere between $17 and $22 a book because we're producing in-house. And so we are able to get bulk discounts, and we also pass the profits on to the author. So what's beautiful about that is because they're getting paid so much more per book, like with this, I wasn't even seeing any of the royalties per book because I didn't sell enough copies to earn my advance back because I had a high six-figure advance. Authors of our books start seeing profits immediately, and their profits are much higher than if they were just to print through Amazon, or especially if they were to get profits through traditional publishing. And what you can do is you can use that money that you're making from the profit of a well-produced, distributed book to reinvest back into the marketing of the book. So now you're making, let's call it, just round it, we'll say $18, $20 per book that you can then take and then reinvest into ads. You can reinvest into different marketing initiatives, do different campaigns. Hell, make yourself a world tour. Like, it's all part of it. But that is the real engine of the book, because in order for a book to keep selling, it has to be well written, obviously, but like certainly the timing needs to be on, needs to be well positioned, and needs to have a unique voice. And you need to have ways of showing up in different places. The number one thing that will drive a book is word of mouth. But word of mouth comes through your generous attention to a campaign over a period of time, and that costs money. So if you own the data and you own the distribution channels, you're going to have access to as much of the revenue as possible from that book immediately. Another example, this book, I got a $165,000 advance, which is very high for a first-time book. And then I never saw another penny of this during the launch because it didn't earn back its royalties during that time. So I was left with 165, and they paid that out over 3 to 4 years, mind you. So they started paying that out in 2015, and I didn't see the end of it until 2017, maybe first half of 2018. Now this book sold a fraction of the copies of this one, but this one I made about $500,000 in about 90 days because I own all the data on this, and I was able to turn that into customers. So that's a different conversation for a different time. But all of that serves you very well as a marketer who wants to reinvest that money into building a book, which really is a product that sells itself. Okay, that's it for now. There will be many videos on writing books and on the business of publishing. If you want to tune in for those, make sure you subscribe to this channel and give us some love. Comment the things I didn't necessarily hit so I can hit them next time. And then yeah, if you want to work with me to do this stuff one-on-one, you can look at my description box, danieldipiazza.com/VIP, or you can go to newwavepress.co to learn more about how we publish books for entrepreneurs. Okay, that's it. It looks like I have to get going. And as our friend Truman once said very famously, in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.